How are all of you lovely people doing today? My name is John, and welcome to another beautiful episode of the Zombie Storyline Q&A. It's been a while since I've done one, so let's go through how this works. This is a series where I take your questions about the zombie storyline and answer them. Whether it's a big, a small, or a simple question, I'm always more than happy to take them on. So, you can either leave your questions down below or tweet me at JohnnyJ25. Without further ado, let's begin. So we're going to kick off today's episode with a question from Jason on Twitter, who asked, Johnny, who made the KT-4? So it's hard to pin down who specifically made the KT-4. It's one of those weapons that unfortunately Treyarch just never gave us enough information about. There's been weapons in the past that we've been able to look at and go, okay, this person specifically made the weapon. Maybe it's because there have been ciphers that have revealed it, maybe it's because their name is actually in the weapon, or maybe it's because they have information encoded into the game elsewhere that let us know who made the weapon. Unfortunately, the KT-4 is not like those other weapons. We can still do some research though and get an idea of the creation of this weapon, which I think is just as interesting. The name KT-4 is actually a nickname for the actual name of the weapon, which is the Tsunagi no Tsurugi, and I'm 90% sure I butchered that Japanese, unfortunately. Unlike German, Japanese is not my specialty. So this is the name actually of an actual weapon. There's a legendary sword in Japanese mythology. It's actually one of the three regalia of Japan, the three sacred treasures, which consist of a sword, as well as a mirror and a jewel. These are three very important artifacts in Japanese lore, as well as legends within Japanese culture. The sword, the Tsunagi no Tsurugi, is one of them. Because this weapon has a Japanese name, in fact the one that is very central to Japanese mythology, we can assume that the KT-4 is actually a Japanese weapon. Now, the Tsunagi no Tsurugi is actually pretty interesting when you dig into the lore. So, the way this weapon was discovered was actually inside the body of a serpent. Now, when we're building the KT-4, we actually have to build many beasts we have to kill many beasts to get its components. We have to kill the spiders to get the purple bat. We have to kill some zombies to get the green goo, whatever that really is. This is a weapon that comes from the beasts, much like the Tsunagi no Tsurugi. In addition to that, this weapon is something that actually isn't very often seen in battle. It instead appears as a way to signal the beginning of the end, which is in some ways what's happening. Jason Blundell has regarded the zombie storyline as something that will have brackets around it by the end of Black Ops 3. We're getting near the end of this 8-year-long journey, and as the Tsunagi no Tsurugi appears, it appears as we're starting to come towards the beginning of the end as we get through most of our characters, and we really start to see that things might actually be wrapping up soon. So the way that Treyarch has actually included this weapon into the game is incredibly interesting. That's not the end of it though. Like I said, this weapon is made of several parts found around on the map. We can actually see them marked on a bulletin board within the map. One of them is pretty interesting. You'll notice there's a picture of a scientist, and he's actually holding the green vat of goo. We can imagine that when we kill the zombie that drops that vat, we're killing that scientist. And because that scientist is carrying one of the central components of the weapon, it isn't too far-fetched to say that he is the inventor of the KT-4. Now, there is no definitive proof. No one's gonna ever say that this man without a name, quite frankly, I can't even read the Japanese caption near his name, which makes it incredibly difficult to do. We're never gonna be able to pinpoint and say this man directly made the wonder weapon, but he right now is our best bet. And because the name lies so heavily in Japanese mythology, it's very easy to say that this is a Japanese weapon created by Division 9. It most likely was not created by a member of Group 935, such as Nexus or Richthofen, or even, say, a group from another nation, such as, say, Russia. The odds of that are incredibly unlikely. For the moment, I would say the KT-4 is a Japanese weapon, and who made this weapon? Possibly this man right here. We now have a question from Aiden Conley on Twitter, and he asked, Johnny, how did they get from Der Eisendrache to the boat in Zetsubou No Shima? One of the tricky things in zombies is that Treyarch very seldom goes into the detail of how our characters travel. Sometimes it's a little bit more obvious. We can see our characters riding in on a lunar lander. Other times they'll actually show us an image of our characters traveling through the desert. In Zetsubou No Shima, they do not do that. How do our characters go from Germany to Japan? Well, it's hard to say. Richtofen has been known to teleport. We've seen our characters teleport as a group. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to suggest that they teleported from Der Eisendrache all the way over to the South Pacific, somewhere near Zetsubou No Shima. What they then did was actually stow away onto a Japanese boat. It's hard to tell because very few of us actually speak Japanese, but in the intro cinematic, they refer to our characters as stowaways. Because they are referred to as stowaways, it's safe to assume that they maybe got to Japan and then snuck onto the boat because they knew the boat was going towards Zetsubou No Shima, and then they were actually captured, and that's how this confrontation happens on the boat. So somehow they got to Japan and then snuck onto the boat, and then once the boat exploded, they swam over to the island. That's how they get from Der Eisendrache to Zetsubou No Shima, as far as we know. Today's episode will end with a question from Nick Zaru on Twitter, who asked, Johnny, why did Takio 1.0 look really old if Dempsey and Richtofen 1.0 were young in our current universe? Well, let's first establish that Richtofen 1.0 looks a little bit older than Richtofen 2.0. Now, Tank, it's hard to say for sure because he was in that capsule, but for the most part, they look relatively close to one another in age. As for Takio, well, Takio looks incredibly old, but I don't think it's necessarily that this Takio is incredibly old. What I think it is that this Takio has just been dragged through the mud. Remember that this was a man that was once 4, 5, 6, 7 times his original size. Had, like, vines protruding from his body and his veins. This was a beast, and then this beast was transformed back into a man. And for somebody to go through a transformation like that, I'd imagine by the end of it, they're not going to look as youthful as they once did. Takio looks this way because he went through the mud. He was tormented. He suffered. He was this beast. He's not gonna look normal when he comes back to his usual self. You can see it. He looks worn out. His hair is very raggedy. It's not held up in the bun like it once was. Part of why we age so noticeably is stress. Our bodies are stressed out, and Takio's has been stressed to the max. So it's not necessarily that Takio is somebody who is incredibly old by the end of Zetsubou No Shima. It's just that his body has been put under pressure in many ways that you would never experience from a man his age, or quite frankly, anyone for that matter. With that, we're going to be wrapping up this episode of the Zombie Storyline Q&A. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like and maybe subscribe for more. I upload several Zombie Storyline Q&As, and if you enjoyed this one, I'm sure you'll like the next one. If you want, you can leave your questions down below, or you can tweet me at JohnnyJ25 with your questions, and maybe while you're there, drop me a follow. It would always be much appreciated. I'm gonna go. Have a wonderful day, and bye.